So please, colleagues, please take your seats as soon as possible. Insert your voting cards so we can check whether or when we achieve a quorum. So again, encouragement parties to take your seats and insert your voting cards. We need 10 more parties to achieve a quorum. And magically, we have a quorum. So thank you all for turning up so promptly. I know evening sessions aren't the most popular events, but we do need them to help us get through our work. So I have outlined a number of times the agenda, and I think the documents or the my proposed way of handling this evening has been on the daily schedule already. I indicated my intention to begin with COM1 number 1, which is a series of draft decisions on eels. This document has been prepared by the Secretariat and captures, we hope, accurately all the changes suggested by parties when we discussed agenda item 63 on eels and gwilla species. So with that, I ask you if we can adopt COM1 number 1 as the conclusion of our debate and take forward these draft decisions. So with that, I open the floor for comments. Thank you. I see the European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. I speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We would like to thank the Secretariat for formulating these new draft decisions and are generally positive to include other conservation aspects as proposed in 19BB and 19CC. However, we do have a question. In 19BB little b and 19DD little f, the Convention for European Eel is mentioned. We would appreciate it if the Secretariat could clarify if it refers to the Convention on Migratory Species and its action plan for Anguilla anguilla. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. When we refer to the convention is this one, CITES. And the intention here is to improve the implementation of the convention, CITES for European eel. It's not referring to a convention on European eels or to any other convention. So with that explanation, are you content? And I see you nodding, thank you. I don't see any other requests for the floor. So on that basis, I'm going to conclude that this committee recommends the adoption of these draft decisions on eels, Anguilla species. Now, to conclude this agenda item, I think we also need, and I don't think this happened in earlier debate because we clearly hadn't concluded any draft decisions, we also need to agree the deletion of decisions 18.197 to 18.202 because these are now superseded. So with that, I think we can conclude this agenda item on item 61, eels. With that, I will now move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is COP19 COM1 number 2, which is on rosewood timber species. The document has been prepared by the United States and includes their suggested changes to the draft decisions, and those are highlighted for you all to be able to see. So with those changes, I ask you again as a committee, are you content to adopt the draft decisions as contained in COM1 number 2? I don't see any requests from the floor, so I'm going to see that as a sign from this committee that you are content with the amendments made to the original series of decisions in COM1 number 2, and that we can recommend their adoption to the final plenary. And I think then, having made that decision as a committee, we can then agree to the deletion of decisions 18.234 to 18.237. And on that basis, we conclude discussion of agenda item 70 on rosewood. The next item on our evening's agenda is a proposal to amend the appendices. It is proposal 45. It is to include rhodiola species in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. It is proposed by China, the European Union, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States. So I would invite one of those parties to introduce the proposal on behalf of the co-proponents. And I see the European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor, Chair. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I am glad to present to you proposal 45 on the inclusion of the genus Rhodiola SPP in Appendix 2, proposed by China, the European Union, Ukraine, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. Rhodiola is a genus of 58 to 90 long-lived perennial herb species widely distributed among the Northern Hemisphere, including the EU. The rhizomes of some species of rhodiola, known as roseroot, have been part of traditional medicine systems in many countries. Nowadays, they are used in a growing number of products and applications, including medicine, food supplements, cosmetics, and others. International trade is currently focused on Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola crenulata, and industrial use has seen a rapid and ongoing rise in recent decades with regard to the diversity and the volumes of rhodiola products in trade. Estimated trade volumes are considerable and are assessed to cover at minimum several 100,000 kilograms of dried rhizomes and its equivalents annually. The vast majority of material currently traded is wild-sourced, and harvesting is focused on the exploitation of the large rhizomes of reproductively mature individuals. Commercial levels of exploitation therefore impact recruitment and long-term population viability, and significant declines in harvested populations of rhodiola species have been reported for a number of range countries where rhodiola is commercially collected. Although information on population status and trends are scarce, overexploitation has been reported to be a significant threat to Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola crenulata, which has led to the inclusion of these species in the national red lists of all known principal source countries. Based on a biological vulnerability to harvesting, increasing levels of international trade, and declines in wild populations, Rhodiola crenulata and Rhodiola rosea meet the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 2 of CITES. Raw and semi-processed material and bulk commodities are considered to be the specimens that appear first and in large volumes in international trade, and commercial demand for these commodities pose immediate conservation concerns for the species. By suggesting annotation #2, which designates all parts and derivatives except seeds and pollen and finished products packaged and ready for retail trade, we are convinced that the proposed listing would, in line with Resolution 1121, Rev CoP18 on the use of annotations, cover those commodities that dominate international trade without generating unnecessary administrative burden to industry, consumers, and CITES authorities. Identification of specific rhodiola species can be challenging, even for live plants, but definitely for dried rhizomes. After specimens have undergone processing, it is not considered possible to identify the respective species without molecular techniques such as DNA barcoding. It has been proven that Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola products are frequently substituted and adulterated both other rhodiola species as with other at stages in the chain. Therefore, the look-alike provisions and criteria of the convention are also met, and consequently, the inclusion of the whole genus Rhodiola is proposed. We therefore invite parties to support the adoption of Proposal 45 to include the genus Rhodiola SPP in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. And with that, as always, I open the floor for comments by parties. I see Norway, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Although the species Rhodiola rosea is listed as least concern, both in Norway and by the IUCN Red List in Europe, we acknowledge that specimens of the species may be difficult to distinguish from other species in the genus that may be under threat and are also in international trade. We therefore support the proposal to list the genus Rhodiola in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I give the floor to Canada, followed by China and Ukraine.
Thank you, Chair. Canada thanks the EU and other co-proponents for preparing this proposal. Canada is a range state for two species, Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola integrifolia. Neither species is identified as being a conservation concern in Canada. Commercial harvest and trade in wild source specimens is not known to occur, but Canada produces commercially cultivated Rhodiola rosea and exports about 10 to 15 tons each year. Given the volume of wild-sourced Rhodiola entering into trade in Eastern and Central Asia, and the conservation concerns that have been raised, Canada supports this proposal to include the two species on Appendix 2, with annotation #2 as proposed. Given that raw materials from different species are frequently substituted for each other during processing, and that it is difficult to tell which species are in the final traded product, Canada also supports the inclusion of the remaining 56 species in the genus in Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. So I'll give now the floor to two co-proponents, China, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, China. We are pleased to have prepared this proposal with the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, North Ireland, and Ukraine. China is a region with the richest plant diversity in Rhodiola, and its main species are listed under national protection. Including all Rhodiola species in Appendix 2 of the Convention would help range states to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of the resources in the world and promote international cooperation. As different taxonomic literatures are used in range states, we kindly request the assistance of the Plants Committee and nomenclature specialists in combining the standard nomenclature reference. China looks forward to the parties' adoption of the proposed amendment of the Appendix 2 as well as the draft decision in CoP19 Doc 84.4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China, and I will come on to Doc 84.4 immediately after this proposal. I give the floor to Ukraine, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the co-proponents of this proposal, we would like to support this and thank you for author for developing this document. We are range states of one of the species, and it is a red data listed on the national red data book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ukraine. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the EU and its co-proponents for the submission of this document and proposal. We are a range state of one of the species, Rhodiola rosea, which is considered to be least concern in Switzerland. but we think that the criteria for listing the whole genus is quite adequately described in the proposal, and therefore we would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. I have no further requests from parties, but before I conclude, I will give the opportunity for any observers to comment. I see only one request, so Traffic, you have the floor.
The IUCN traffic analyses concluded that all rhodiola species meet the criteria for listing in Appendix 2, either by meeting criteria in Annex 2A or 2B of ResConf 9.24. The proposed annotation number 2 would exclude finished products packaged and ready for retail trade. Resolution 9.24 states annotations to proposals should include those specimens that first appear in international trade as export from range states. An unknown proportion of exports from some range states are in finished products, with some of those likely produced from domestic wild harvest. Therefore, Traffic recommends that the trade in finished products containing rhodiola is monitored to ensure that it does not represent a threat to the survival of the species' wild populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Traffic, for those comments. I have no further requests on the floor, so I conclude on the basis of that that this committee recommends by consensus that this proposal be adopted. So with that, I will then move on to document 84.4, which is directly linked to this proposal. And document 84.4 is entitled Standard Nomenclature for Rhodiola Species, and it has been submitted by the European Union and its member states. So you have the floor to introduce this, European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The taxonomy of the genus Rhodiola appears not entirely resolved for a few species. In some of the popular nomenclatural databases and references used in international contexts, discrepancies and ambiguities regarding the number of accepted species and the exact taxonomic placements and representations of some of the taxa could eventually lead to confusion or misinterpretation among parties in the context of implementation and enforcement of trade controls for rhodiola species under CITES. To address these issues and with regard to requirements laid out in ResConf 1211 on standard nomenclature, a CITES standard nomenclatural reference seems to be necessary for the genus Rhodiola. Doc 84.4 outlines the nomenclatural issues in Rhodiola species, highlights a potential candidate standard nomenclature reference, and proposes draft decisions that direct the Plans Committee to consider and evaluate the nomenclatural issues and to identify and recommend a suitable standard nomenclatural reference for amendment of the annex to Resolution Conf 1211 to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. This document has been prepared with the involvement of and in line with the recommendations made by the nomenclature specialist for plants, and we are grateful for her expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, European Union. So I open the floor for comments by parties. I see the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As it relates to document CoP19, Doc 84.4 on nomenclature for rhodiola, the United States supports adoption of the draft decision 19AA as revised by the Secretariat for clarity and consistency, directing the Plants Committee to evaluate any nomenclatural issues and make recommendations on any amendments to Resolution Conf 1211 on standard nomenclature for consideration at the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The United States, along with our co-proponents, submitted detailed comments related to the synonymy and species distributions to produce the taxon list reflected in Annex 1 of the species proposal. As such, we would not support suggestion to adopt a standard reference at the present meeting. The taxon list in Annex 1 is the best and most accurate reflection of nomenclature, and we support using Annex 1 as a basis for updating the CITES checklist of species following this meeting, should the recommendation to include this genus in Appendix 2 be adopted by the parties later this week. The United States is home to 3 rhodiola species, including 4 subspecies, one of which is federally protected under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. Therefore, we also wish to note for the record our request that the 4 subspecies of Rhodiola integrifolia, namely Rhodiola integrifolia subspecies integrifolia, subspecies leadii, subspecies neo-mexicana, and subspecies procera, also be included as separate taxon entries in the CITES checklist of species. Including the subspecies in the CITES checklist will allow us to continue to regulate and protect this subspecies from entering into commercial trade. Annex 1 of Proposal CoP19 Prop 45 includes the scientific synonyms and complete distribution data for these subspecies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. United States, a moment, make sure we've captured all that. So thank you, United States. I think we have all that. We will take a note of your request about the various subspecies, so they're captured in the record, and that action can be taken. And we note your suggestion to adopt the draft decision with the amendments as amended by the Secretariat. So okay, I see the European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It was just about making clear that the EU supports the United States on the nomenclatural consideration, and also not to adopt the final nomenclatural reference now, but only support the draft decisions as revised by the Secretariat, but not the adoption of the nomenclatural reference at this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, European Union. So yes, we are agreed that we adopt the draft decisions. We don't adopt a standard nomenclature now, and that we capture the request relating to the 4 subspecies that the United States made. So I think with that, we can conclude this document as amended with the conclusions I just read, I just stated by consensus. I don't see any more requests from the floor, either from parties or observers. So with that, I conclude discussions on document 84.4. And we now move to proposal 52. From Switzerland, which is to amend the annotation to the listing of Orchidaceae included in Appendix 2, but I invite you, Switzerland, to introduce the proposal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. With the proposal CoP19, Proposal 52, Switzerland would like to propose an amendment to annotation #4 with the addition of a new paragraph G to exempt finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Appendix 2 orchid species Platyla striata, Cycnochus cooperi, Gastrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobby from CITES regulations. Switzerland has commissioned several studies, case studies on trade in extracts from a range of orchid species for the cosmetic industry. These studies have provided important insights and information for the analysis of this trade. The results of these case studies were presented to the Plants Committee for its information. Based on the analysis of these case studies, discussions with the relevant actors in this trade, and analysis of the CITES trade data, all 5 proposed orchid species that are used in the cosmetic industry are artificially propagated, they are grown under controlled conditions, and regarding Resolution Conf 11.11, Ref CoP18, on regulation of trade in plants, all the proposed orchid species fulfill the definition of artificially propagated. The cosmetic industry has strict requirements for the registration of a new product and the requirements regarding the exclusion of risks to human health and the environment and the quality of such products must follow the same protocols as, for example, medicinal products or for food for human consumption. The compliance with these strict requirements and tests for the registration of a product containing orchid extract are only possible with standardized plants, for example, with artificially propagated plants, because with wild specimens, the ingredients vary from specimen to specimen and standardization is not possible. The species are not derived from wild collected sources for cosmetics due to the prevalence and low cost of the artificially propagated stock. Our case studies, which we have been carrying out for years now, also prove this, and the probability that there is a risk for the wild populations is extremely small. All species are easy to cultivate and are also grown on a large scale, and all trade reported is as artificially propagated. Besides that, only finished products packaged and ready for retail will be excluded, while trade of raw and semi-finished products such as extracts will remain under CITES regulation. In the discussion of our proposal and the exchange with other member states, some parties have expressed concerns that wild specimens might be introduced into the trade flows and therefore threaten the populations of these species in the wild. We take this concern seriously, and we think that it will be important to monitor the implementation and conservation impact of exempting these finished products. Therefore, we would like to submit 4 draft decisions intended to monitor the implementation of the annotation #4 exemption to assess any impact of this exemption on the 5 Appendix 2 orchid species, and to identify any conservation impacts of the annotation #4 exempting on the 5 species in the wild if the proposal is adopted by the Conference of the Parties at CoP19. At CoP18, a similar approach was taken when parties amended annotation #4 to exempt finished products of aloe ferox packaged and ready for retail trade, was adopted with decisions to monitor the implementation of that exemption. We therefore hope you will support our proposal and the decisions submitted. So I would read now the decisions. Directed to the Secretariat, 19.AA, no less than 1 year after entry into force of the decisions adopted at 19th meeting of Conference of the Parties, the Secretariat shall issue a notification to the parties requesting the following information. Small a, whether there have been any implementation issues concerning the annotation #4, exemption for finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Platypus striata, Cycnochus corpori, Castrodia lata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi, and if so, describe the issues. Small b, whether parties have identified any conservation impacts of the annotation #4 exempting on the status of Platyla striata, Cycnochus coberi, Castrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi in the wild. And small c, based on the responses received, prepare a report to the Standing Committee on implementation challenges and to the Plants Committee on conservation impacts of the exemption. Then decisions directed to the parties. 19.bb, parties are encouraged to submit pertinent information concerning the annotation #4 exemption for finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Platyla striata, Cycnochus coberi, Castrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi as requested in decision 19.aa. And decisions directed to the Plants Committee, 19.cc, the Plants Committee shall small
I see China, followed by the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Chair. China is pleased to see this proposal submitted by Switzerland. This work represents the significant progress obtained from intersessional studies over the three past meetings of the Conference of the Parties. We thank the Plants Committee and the chairs of the intersessional working groups for their efforts. The proposed annotation amendments and exemptions, while improving regulatory efficiency in parties to the Convention, also ensured that CITES regulation covers and focuses on crude and processed products exported by range states that first appeared in international trade. This is consistent with the requirements of Resolution Conf 11.21, Rev CoP18, use of annotations in Appendices 1 and 2. In relation to the species concerned in this proposal, China provided 2 reference cases to the study of the Plant Committee. As stated in the proposal, Platyla striata and Gastrodia elata are widely cultivated in China and are already dominating the international trade. These two species have been collected from wild for traditional medicinal purposes and traded in small quantities in local villages and towns in China. The update of China's key protected species of wild plants, the enforcement of China's domestic legislation, and the implementation of the domestic code for good agricultural practice can ensure the effective monitoring of the international trade in these two species. In this connection, China supports this proposal and the draft decisions proposed by Switzerland. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank Switzerland for preparing this proposal. Korea is one of the range states for Platyla striata and Gastrodia elata out of the 5 species in this proposal. We would like to underline that for the last decade, no wild plants or its derivatives of either species have been exported from Korea. In addition, in the case of Gastrodia elata, we would like to emphasize that artificial propagation technologies are supported by our policies, such as the construction of smart farms by the Korean local governments. In addition, we agree that artificially propagated plants must be used as raw materials to satisfy the standards for cosmetic ingredients, as Switzerland said. Accordingly, Korea asks the parties to be in favor of adopting this proposal and draft decisions. In addition, if this proposal is adopted, we ask you to consider adding the definition of cosmetics written in the guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual reports to paragraph 8 of the interpretation of the appendix. We would like to remind it was already discussed and adopted at last COP through COP 18 on 102. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. I give the floor to Canada, followed by Liechtenstein.
Well, thank you, Chair. Canada commends Switzerland for the extensive research and case studies it carried out in advance of its proposal to amend annotation #4. Canada notes that virtually all international trade in the species referenced in the amendment is in artificially propagated specimens. Canada believes that the scale of artificial propagation involved and the want of evidence that wild populations of the relevant orchid species are contributing to international trade in orchid specimens supports adoption of the amendment proposed for annotation #4. Canada is therefore pleased to support the draft decision, the proposal. Canada also supports the decision submitted by Switzerland, which we believe provide an additional level of caution that further supports the amendment proposed for annotation #4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor now to Liechtenstein, followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to express our support for the Swiss proposal and the draft decisions that were just exposed earlier. The proposal is based on several sound investigations on orchid derivatives and their origin in cosmetics. For the 5 orchid species we are dealing with here, sufficient evidence of their cultivated origin is provided. Propagation and cultivation occurs generally at an industrial scale for quality, quantity, standardization, and not ultimately cost reasons. We therefore consider that approving the proposed amendment of annotation 4 and the draft decisions is a valid way to make the application of CITES more effective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liechtenstein. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. Even though we agree that most cosmetic products produced and traded by the industry do not contain any wild source material, we do not feel confident that trade in wild plants would not be facilitated in the future under these proposed exemptions. At the local and domestic level, trade in wild source medicinal products of some of the relevant orchid species outlined here has been reported, and it is known that higher prices exist in many instances for wild source materials, and even specially demanded. Gastrodia alata, one of the species, is listed as vulnerable in the IUCN Red List, and the conservation status of the other species remain unclear. A precautionary approach is suggested unless the annotation is changed to exclude source codes Y and W, which unfortunately is not now possible because this would broaden the scope of the proposal. We also note under paragraph 6b(i) of Resolution Conference 11.21, which deals with compliance, outlines that commodities that are proposed to be excluded should not first appear in international trade as exports for range states. We found that Blatilla striata cosmetics do first appear in trade from a range state. We therefore sadly cannot accept and oppose Proposal 52. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I'll come back to the proponents in a short while, but I will offer the floor to, I see Australia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Australia would like to support the proposal from Switzerland, including the amendments introduced into the floor this evening. Thank you.
And now I see the UK. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom would also like to voice our support for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I don't see any other requests from parties. I will see if there are any observers who wish to take the floor. Okay, I don't see any. If you just give me a moment. Thank you, colleagues. So I think I would go back to Switzerland as a proponent. You've heard the debate. Clearly there's been a degree of support, but the EU and its 27 member states are not in support of the proposal. So yes, I would welcome your views on what you see as the best way forward here. So Switzerland, you have the floor whenever you wish.
Thank you, Chair. We didn't quite understand what the EU was proposing in adding wording that wild and Y specimens would be excluded and that this would be an extension of the proposal. I don't think so. That would be a reduction of the scope. So we could live with such an addition, and otherwise we would want to go for a vote. Thank you.
So we're just discussing, I'll give the floor to the EU in a moment, whether your suggestion amounts to an increase in scope or not, and I think our view is really that to align with Switzerland, that would be possible. It is narrowing the scope. And if that was the case, would you like European Union to give us your sort of precise wording about how you would amend the proposed annotation? So, EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. If we could limit it to artificially propagated material only, I think we would be very happy. Yeah.
Okay, so can you maybe consult with your colleagues and give us the kind of precise wording that you would like to see, perhaps?
So at the end of annotation 4, so finished products artificially propagated and packaged and ready for the retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of the species then. So finished products artificially propagated and packaged and ready, yeah.
So perhaps maybe your wording, European Union, needs to be finished products derived from artificial propagation, comma, packaged and ready for the retail trade. Would that work better?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
And I take it, Switzerland, would you be content with that change?
Yes.
You okay? Yeah. So with that amendment, and given the level of support and the absence of opposition now, I think we can adopt Proposal 52 with the amendment proposed by the European Union and with the draft decisions read into the record by Switzerland. And I don't see any requests from the floor, so I conclude that that is the recommendation from this committee, and we have done so by consensus. So the next item on this evening's agenda is to look at two ComDocs, which have been online for a while now. The first of these is COM1 number 3. It relates to agenda item 82 on medicinal and aromatic plant species. We have a series of draft decisions which were prepared by the drafting group I created, which consisted of China, the United States, the European Union, the chair of the Plants Committee, and Traffic, and I'm very grateful for that, to that group for proposing these decisions. So with that, I would open the floor for any comments from parties on these draft decisions. And if there are no requests from the floor, as there aren't at the moment, I will assume that we're happy to adopt these by consensus. I will see if there are any comments from observers. And I don't see any, so I conclude on that basis that this committee recommends by consensus that these draft decisions are adopted. And that concludes our discussion on item 82. We now move on to COP19 COM1 number 4, which is on a series of draft decisions and a resolution on marine turtles, Kelownidae and Mokelidae, which arose from the work of a working group on marine turtles, which was, I think, created on our first day, quite a large working group. The European Union chaired this, and I'm very grateful to the European Union for their work in bringing this to a conclusion. So with that, I invite comments from parties on the draft decision and draft resolution contained in COM1 number 4. And I don't see any comments from parties. I'll give the opportunity to any observers to comment. And I don't see any, I see Israel followed by China. So you have the floor, Israel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're moving quite quickly, and I apologize if I'm not keeping up. I just wanted some clarification on Resolution 4.25 that appears in this document on page 3. The text that's in the second paragraph agrees that the scope and effect of a reservation entered in accordance with Article 15, paragraph 3 is the same as the scope and effect of the amendment. This language may have been clear after hours of deliberation in the COM group, but I think it leaves a lot of ambiguity, and I was wondering perhaps if the head of this group would perhaps explain what the intention is here, because before we make any specific suggestions for change, we'd like to hear a little bit of why it's worded that way.
So can you just, we're kind of looking for the right paragraph here, and we're not entirely sure which paragraph you're on. So this is the draft resolution on marine turtles, and you're referring, if Israel, if you could just clarify exactly which paragraph you're referring to.
I may be in the wrong document. I'm sorry. Okay, I think I'm in the wrong document. Okay, apologize, Kat.
It's no problem. There's lots of documents and lots of papers to look at. I know it's hard to keep up. So that issue doesn't relate to this document. So I see China, you have requested the floor. So
thanks for the efforts made by working group. China has implemented the action plan for marine turtle conservation in 2019, which covers the action plans for the next 15 years. China supports the new decision and the new resolution suggested by the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, China, for those comments. And I'm assuming that there are no requests on the floor from parties, that all the parties here are content with the draft decision and draft resolution also. I can give an opportunity to observers to speak if they wish to do so. I don't see any requests, so again, I conclude on that basis that this committee recommends by consensus that the draft decision and resolution contained in COP19 COM 1.4 can be recommended for adoption. I'm just going to check we don't have any decisions to delete on items 64.1 or 2. Thank you for your patience. We're just making sure we delete the right series of decisions. So I think on the basis of the ComDoc that we've just recommended for adoption, that we delete decisions 18.210 to 18.216 as they've now been implemented. So that does conclude our discussions on on documents 64.1 and 64.2. So with that, we start to move on to the next series of proposals that I suggested we discuss this evening. So we will do, and we're making very good progress. We move on to proposal 34 for the Centrolenidae species, glass frogs for inclusion in Appendix 2. A number of proponent countries that I won't read out now, but I invite one of those to introduce the document to us. So if one of the proponents wishes to press the microphone button, the floor will be yours. So I see Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair. The glass frogs are very beautiful species and not very well known by scientists, and they are emblematic for our region in Latin America. We have always had them alongside, and they've been part of the logo of the COP. It's important for the region. This proposal is presented by Costa Rica, Argentina, Brazil, the Ivory Coast, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Gabon, Guinea, Niger, Panama, Peru, Togo, and the USA. And it's also supported by Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Bolivia. They are all range states for glass frogs. We also have support from countries from Africa, Asia, and Oceania who share our concerns for the unsustainable use in illegal markets in developed countries. Almost 60% of glass frogs that are on the IUCN Red List are under a level of threat. And it includes 10 species that are in critical danger, 28 endangered, 21 that are vulnerable, 11 that are near threatened, and according to the IUCN criteria, they must be listed as at threat because of their position. A lot of the information on populations hasn't got recent field studies. What we have are for very specific areas, and we have species that there is only some oral information available from researchers. So we're calling for the regulation of trade, and that we take care of the trade, and we look at how many of these frogs are entering trade, and that we ensure that they're not leaving our countries illegally, as is currently happening. We would like to use this convention, which promotes international cooperation to protect the glass frogs from uncontrolled exploitation, by including the whole family in Appendix 2. The proposal 34 calls for the inclusion of all of the family in that, and we believe it meets paragraph A, and we call for the inclusion of the other species of the glass frog in accordance with paragraph 2B of Article 2 of the Convention, and it also meets Article 2B of the Convention. And as it is a species that has so many lookalikes and that are so similar, it's virtually impossible to differentiate. Since the last COP, we have updated this proposal with the support of scientific experts in amphibians, and we have looked at the authorities for enforcement with police Interpol and national police and prosecutors. When we detect a criminal event, we see that there are already large volumes. And so the criminal structures are organized throughout all of the process of trafficking. When it comes to glass frogs, there's no doubt that there is criminal involvement, and what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. When there is an economic need with a lucrative market such as the glass frog, which according to Seprona, Spain, and other international police, we can see that there are huge sums involved in the cost in selling one specimen, and there are well-organized criminal groups which operate in our countries, and the main consumers are in European countries, and they have made it into a professional commodity and trade. It is a part of the international pet trade, and there is not enough traceability. We don't have registers of exports. And what's even more worrying is that the official records for many of our countries show that they were exported for scientific purposes, not for commercial use. And the database that we have from the United States shows that we have seen an increase of 44%, the species reaching the US commerce. That means that since 2016 to 2021, the number of frogs that has reached the United States has been more than 15,000 individuals. Most countries where these species are imported have no traceability on the species. Those who think that this proposal is not yet necessary, we have often seen how frog numbers can disappear overnight. They are threatened, not only through exploitation for commercial purposes, but we are seeing this with the glass frog. So this all reflects the need to include them in Appendix 2. Urgently, we need to protect these species and generate robust scientific information on the species and ensure that the trade does not threaten these species, in particular the amphibian group, which is one of the most threatened. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. And, before I even opened the floor for parties, I seem to acquired a very long queue, but I would ask people just to wait until I open the floor. But I do now invite contributions from parties. And I will, and also I see a number of proponents asking for the floor. So I'll give the floor to Kuwait, followed by the Gambia.
Thank you, Chair. Kuwait believe that the species meet the criteria to be included in Appendix 2. So we would like to support the listing of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. I give the floor, I think I said, to the Gambia.
Thank you, Chair. The Gambia thanks the proponent for submitting this proposal, which provides further evidence and support to justify including this family in Appendix 2 to ensure trade is legal, transparent, and sustainable. We are pleased to support the proposal and encourage all parties to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Gambia, I give the floor now to Mali. You have the floor.
Merci bien, Monsieur. Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to take this opportunity also to thank and congratulate the countries that had the kindness of presenting this proposal to list this species in Appendix 2. Chair, it's very important and it's also catastrophic. We are facing a situation for species. We have at least 12 species that are already being imported to the United States. And I'd like to thank the United States, who have also contributed to reveal the situation on this species. When we look at this species, there are at least 10 that are critically endangered, 21 that are almost threatened, and 28 which are lacking and are therefore data deficient. And there are 5 that haven't yet been evaluated. Chair, it's important and necessary. It is high time we change the status of this species to list it, at least in Appendix 2, and it may well one day be transferred to Appendix 1. So I call on other parties to support this listing of this species in Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Marley. I've got a very long list of speakers. It's already gone off the screen, so I can't see everyone necessarily. And it is an evening session, so I ask you all to be very brief. Depends how late you want to stay, of course. I'll give the floor to Senegal, followed by Argentina.
Voilà, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Senegal would like to congratulate the proponents who have put forward this proposal, and it reflects a significant concern for a group of species because there are several species of glass frogs, and we support it because it's very much in line with species that are under threat. So we join our support to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Argentina. As a co-proponent, I would ask, as I always have, ask the co-proponents to be brief because there is a number of you, but you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Argentina, as a co-proponent, would also like to say what are the main reasons behind this proposal to include the glass frog species in the Appendix 2. We have seen a threat to this species, which is the illicit trade for the international pet trade, which end up sold in the European Union, the United States principally. And based on data we've obtained from various sources, we have seen that there has been a significant increase over the last 5 years in this trade. We propose including the whole centre, the family, because it's so difficult to distinguish between the species, sometimes only by genetic means. And in accordance with the criteria under Article 2 of the Convention and the Resolution 9.24. The trade in these species is something where it's important that we work with both importing and exporting countries. For now, we don't have a great deal of data on the trade, but protecting this whole family is very important to ensure that we have full implementation. And Argentina would also like to say that with the adoption of this proposal, we wouldn't be affecting the use of the resource by local families or any other activity based on legal trade. The aim of this proposal is to have sufficient information on the international trade so that we can fight against illegal trafficking and trade. And so we call on parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I'll give the floor to Cuba, followed by Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Cuba would like to join in supporting Proposal 34. We believe that it will assist in the control of this family, which is subject to significant international trade. So we firmly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cuba. I give the floor now to Panama.
Thank you very much, Chair. Panama, a co-proponent of Proposal 34, thinks it's highly necessary and high time to include glass frogs in Appendix 2. We have solid facts and evidence. It's important we protect these fragile and important frogs, which are very attractive to the pet trade. If we look in the internet, it's very quick to see many offers on the international market. So it's indisputable that trade, in particular unregulated trade, is currently a threat to the conservation of these species. We would also like to repeat that the basis of including the whole family is based on the fact that there is a great similarity between all the species. And this is a challenge even for experts. So the full inclusion will allow for more effective implementation of this amendment, and it will help customs officers and environmental protection officers in carrying out their work. And that is what we have heard from them. And so we would respectfully call on all parties to consider lending their support to Proposal 34. Thank you.
Thank you, Panama. I'll give the floor to Mauritania, to be followed by the Congo. I would ask parties, I say a very long list. Please just say whether you're in favor or if you have concerns or opposition, really, so that we can get through this and form a picture of how the room is feeling at the moment. So I think I said Mauritania followed by the Congo.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this proposal. Above all, and first of all, I'd like to congratulate the proponents. I think it's very praiseworthy. We express our full support for the proposal to include glass frogs in Appendix 2. It's important not to forget that the Convention requests the proposals to be prepared with the best information and scientific data available, and we can see that that is very much the case for this proposal. In addition, we must bear in mind the importance of taking into account the precautionary principle when it comes to uncertainty. So bearing all of that in mind, we fully support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauritania. I'll give the floor to the Congo, I said, followed by Guatemala. Again, a request, just keep your comments very much focused on whether you're supporting or opposing. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Congo would like to express their full and complete support for this proposal. It is essential that we ensure that international trade of this amphibian family be long-lasting and sustainable, given that it's absolutely unregulated now. We must call on all parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. The Congo, I give the floor to Guatemala, followed by Sri Lanka.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Guatemala supports this significant proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Guatemala. That's the kind of intervention I like, short and to the point. I'll give the floor to Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Chair. Sri Lanka also supports the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. I've got 28 parties on the list waiting to speak. So if everybody speaks for a few minutes, you're going to be here quite a long time. And a lot of you, I think, are going to be saying the same thing. So really, I'm good, and I have a lot of the co-proponents also on the list wanting to speak. And again, I'm assuming you all support your proposal, so I'm going to try and pick parties that are not proponents, so I get a feel for what the full perspective from the room is. So 28 proponents, if you all talk for 2.5, 3 minutes, that's quite a long time. So it's up to you, it's your evening. We can stay here forever if you want. But the interpreters won't stay forever, I know, but so please, 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 just get to the point. So I heard last from Sri Lanka. I'll give the floor now to Liberia, followed by the United States.
Thank you, Chair. Liberia humbly support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what we like. United States, in terms of brevity, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States is pleased to support the co-proponents, as a co-proponent of this proposal. We've seen rapidly increasing trade in these species to the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. It's hard for me to pick out who are the co-proponents and who aren't, but I am going to look for non-co-proponents at the moment. So I'll give the floor to China, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. China also supports this proposal. Thank you.
I give the floor to India, followed by Israel.
Thank you, Chair. India also supports the proposal.
Okay, I give the floor now to Israel, I think I said.
Thank you, Chair. Israel also supports the proposal.
Okay, I'll give the floor to the European Union, and then I may... European Union, followed by Canada, and then I may change tack a little. European Union, then Canada.
Thank you, Chair. And I will be not that brief, if you allow me, because I am going to voice a bit a dissenting voice in this case. Indeed, the assessments made by the European Union of Proposal 34 reveal that only one species out of the 158 may meet the CITES listing criteria. And according to our assessment, all other species do not comply with the listing criterion in Article 2, Paragraph 2A, as there is no indication that current or expected trade poses a threat to any species of the family. Recorded international trade is restricted to few non-threatened species, and there is no reference to a specific demand for threatened taxa. Therefore, the EU suggests the proponents to reduce the proposal substantially. The EU is also concerned about the application of the lookalike criterion, as no evidence is provided that each of the species proposed, according to Article 2, Paragraph 2b, resemble at least one of the species proposed according to Article 2, Paragraph 2a. Furthermore, there are no externally discernible characters which would allow identifying a frog as belonging to the family Centrolenidae, and striking similarities exist between members of this family and species belonging to at least 5 other frog families. While the EU acknowledges that listing high taxa can make enforcement easier in some cases, customs officers would depend on experts to know whether a frog is a member of family glass frogs. The EU believes that reducing the scope of the proposal would significantly increase the applicability and still ensure the protection of all species which might be affected by trade. To meet the concerns of the proponents about trade which violates their national legislation, we recommend listing all species of the family Centrolenidae in Appendix 3. This would ensure that only legally exported specimens enter international trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I'll give the floor now to Canada, followed by Chile.
Thank you, Chair. We will be brief.
We thank the proponent for preparing this proposal. Canada aligning itself with the European Union view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor now to Chile.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair. We'd like to thank the proponents for this important presentation. We think that those criteria that have been explained meet all the criteria necessary, and we support the proposal and call on all parties to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Colombia, followed by Kenya.
Gracias, señor presidente. Thank you, Chair. Colombia would like to thank Costa Rica and the co-proponents for Proposal 34 to include all species of the Centralenidae family in Appendix 2, and for drawing our attention to the current situation of amphibians in general. On the subject, we would like to highlight that this is a subject that's particularly important to Colombia, given that we are the fourth country with the highest number of amphibians on a global level, and we have a large diversity of the family Centralenidae, and we have 80 and 85 of these species, and 35 of them are endemic. From the point of view of the scientific and administrative authorities, we have carried out an ambitious review on a national level to look at Resolution 9.24's relevance, and we've seen the concerns on illegal trafficking and the IUCN's global vision, and some of our national experts participated in their work. And we have seen that some of the species in Central America are within the threatened categories. It can be a loss of habitat, climate change, and diseases that affect these species. So we think that the implementation also of the recommendations and decisions in document 60, where we will look at the impact of trade on this species, as well as looking at enforcement challenges, so that we can hopefully close some of the gaps in terms of knowledge and acquire solid data in order to be able to work in the protection. So, Señor Presidente, we need to ensure we fill in any knowledge gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. I said I'd give the floor to Kenya, then followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. To provide for regulation of trade in the glass frogs, control illegal trade, and monitor the legal trade, Kenya supports the proposal to include the entire family of the glass frogs, Centralenidae, in Appendix 2. So we support the adoption of the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I give the floor now to Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia appreciates proponents of this proposal as well as the progress made by proponents since it proposed in the last CoP18. Concerning a look-like species and precautionary consideration in implementing CITES regulation, Indonesia support for inclusion this family into CITES Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I think I said, I've forgotten who I said after Indonesia. Well, I'll give the floor to Uruguay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Uruguay fully supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Cameroon.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you very much, Chair. Cameroon supports this proposal.
I still have about 14 parties, I think, asking for the floor. If you're kind of coming in to indicate support, or I'll put this another way, it would be quite helpful to me to know if there's any additional opposition to this proposal. And I know all the proponents, several proponents still asking for the floor. There are some non-proponents that I would like to go through, but if you remove your button now, I would take that as indicating your support, and I would then look to those non-proponent parties that are left as presumably indicating they want to express their opposition. Okay, so as the non-proponents, I see Somalia and then Benin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to request you, when you are going to mention the names of the country, to be fair and not prefer one from the other. Somalia fully supports the glass frogs to be enlisted in Appendix 2, and I think we have reached the time glass frogs meet the criteria. It's a responsibility to all range states to be conserving this precious species. Thank you.
Thank you, Somalia. I give the floor now to Benin.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wish to take the floor to bring Benin's support to this proposal, and we would like to congratulate all proponents for this proposal. Indeed, the similarities between the different species mean that they're difficult to differentiate, and therefore we support this proposal. Thank you.
I give the floor now to Burkina Faso.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. This proposal with such strong support from the range states should be taken into account with the highest importance. An important number of these range states have already forbidden the export of these species, but illegal trade of the glass frogs persists. Burkina Faso supports this proposal, and as such we will encourage these countries to achieve their conservation and put an end to illegal trade that is unsustainable for these species. Thank you.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I think I have 7 parties still requesting the floor, and I'm just checking my list of the proponents, but you are all proponent countries. And so it seems to me I can take it you are supportive. Do you still want to take the floor? I can hopefully bring things to a conclusion a bit more quickly if you do not, but I can give you the floor if you insist, but I would ask you to be very, very brief. Okay, I see the numbers are going down. That's good. I give the floor to Niger, then Dominican Republic.
Merci bien, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. As a co-proponent of this proposal, we would like to insist on the fact that we legitimate our position. We are happy to support all proponents of this proposal. It is absolutely crucial that we support all these parties or range states of glass frog, and we invite all parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
So, Dominican Republic, followed by Guinea. Very, very brief, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Dominican Republic, as a current chair of the Development Committee on the Development Agenda, is a co-proponent for this Proposal 34 on behalf of Costa Rica. Our country, an island, most of the amphibians in our country are endemic, reason for which we have always taken the greatest responsibility in the preservation of nature and wildlife. And we would like to support glass frogs as a proponent because the regulation of its trade would guarantee its survival. Thank you, Chair.
So I now give the floor to Guinea, then Brazil, then Gabon, and that concludes the list of parties, and I'm closing the list.
Thank you, Chair. Guinea supports as co-proponent of this proposal, and we request all parties to support this proposal for the inclusion of all species of the glass frog in Appendix 2. We recognize the importance of regulating the international trade of these species and respond to the request of the co-proponents so that the international community helps to protect these species from the threat of international trade, pet trade. We have analyzed the documents, and we believe that there is enough evidence to grant the inclusion in Appendix 2. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Guinea. Brazil, then Gabon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you for giving me the floor. As you request, I will be brief. Brazil, as co-proponent, would like to thank the other co-sponsors for presenting this proposal. Inclusion in Appendix 2 seeks to ensure that the harvesting of wild species does not reduce the populations to a level that their survival may be threatened by continued harvesting or other impacts. We therefore urge other parties to support the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. And finally, I give the floor to Gabon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Gabon will be very brief, as you have requested. As co-proponent of this proposal for the listing of glass frogs in Appendix 2 of CITES, we would like to encourage strongly all parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabon. So that concludes the list of parties. I will see if any observers wish to take the floor. I may look to give the floor to a couple. Just give me a minute. Okay, I'll give the floor to the Pet Advocacy Network, I think it is. If you, again, could be brief, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. It's obvious this proposal does not meet the requirements for listing. None of the species are traded in significant numbers internationally. Most are very common. The habitat destruction combined with the impacts of chytric fungus are the cause of the population's declines where they are occurring. While there was a spike in legal trade for a few years after these species entered the pet trade, that trade has dropped precipitously and consistently over the past several years. This is because these are species that are easily bred in captivity. In fact, current trade in these species is now dominated by trade in captive bred specimens. And as Israel so eloquently pointed out during debate on Item 89, Prop 40, since trade is not contributing to the decline in population, then a listing is not appropriate. Finally, the greatest threat to glass frogs is the chytric fungus, a very serious threat that the pet trade is doing more to attempt to solve than any government agency, and one that may well rely on the captive bred specimens for repopulation once it is resolved. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Pet Advocacy Network. I'll give the floor to HSI. Again, a request to be brief, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to make this intervention on behalf of Humane Society International, Defenders Pro-Wildlife, IFO, Animal Welfare Institute, Species Survival Network, and 15 other organizations. We will be sending the list to the Secretariat. We would like to support fully the 14 proponents on this proposal to include the family central any day in Appendix 2. We have to make sure that these species be protected dutifully from any negative impact of trade. From the perspective from the implementation of legislation in inspection points, there's a huge difference between the different species, so including only some species would make it absolutely impossible for the authorities to distinguish them, because some can only be identified via DNA. If we only include some species in this proposal, demand will definitely go to those which are not protected by CITES, something we have seen. It already happens with some other wild species. These amphibians are a symbol of the Latin American Caribbean region, and for all these reasons, we agree with the proponents to include the Cetrolenidae in Appendix 2 of CITES, and we would like to invite and encourage all parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
Okay, I only have two other observers requesting the floor, so on this occasion I will give them both the floor, but again, brief, please, because the evening is kind of moving on and we want to move on to other topics. So I give the German Society for Herpetology, then the China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recommend parties not to adopt that proposal as it has been submitted because, based on our analysis, the criteria for an inclusion in Appendix 2 are not met. By far the most serious threats to glass frogs is habitat loss, spread of specific diseases such as the chytrid fungus, and climate change. After the respective proposal of CoP18, 153 glass frog species have been reassessed by IUCN. For none of these species, the international trade has been identified as a major threat. Of the 12 species proposed now for inclusion in Appendix 2, according to Article 2, Paragraph 2a of the Convention and to Criterion B in the Annex 2a of Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP17, all but one are assessed as least concern by the IUCN, while this latter species has been assessed as data deficient. Additionally, we would like to emphasize that glass frogs can be determined by trained inspectors using the available determination keys. So there is little evidence that glass frogs meet Criterion A in Annex 2b of the respective resolution. We recommend that the supporting range states assess the population status of their glass frog species and then might take into consideration an Appendix 3 listing of those species that might be or become pertinent in the scope of collection for the international pet trade. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And finally, to the China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation, you have the floor again. Please be very brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to note that while 17% of amphibian species are in trade, only 2.4% are within the remit of CITES. This includes the glass frogs not being represented. From our analysis, we find that several species are actually in trade within the European Union which are not in this list because of a lack of databasing within the European Union. These species are uniquely identifiable by their clear abdomens as well as having green bones, meaning that whilst it's been stated they are confusable with other frog species, this is not in fact the case unless we conflate all tree frogs with looking the same, which I hope this room would agree that they do not. Conservation of these species is essential, and an Appendix 3 listing would not be appropriate given that many species extend across more than one country. We would urge all participants to support this proposal, being that it has been given by the range states, and demand in areas like the EU is fueling the extinction of these species, but sufficient data cannot be gathered because of a lack of systematic data collection by countries where they are being imported. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation. So we've had quite a long debate on this proposal. There has been a lot of support expressed in the room. There's also been some reservations expressed, and that included the European Union and its 27 member states. I would like to go back to the European Union and ask you, suggested, I think, that the parties reduce their scope, and I think you were suggesting that an Appendix 3 listing was more appropriate for the family. But I just wondered if you would, A, clarify what you meant by reducing the scope, precisely what your suggestion was, so that I can then go back to the proponents to see if they would be willing to reduce the scope at all. And then secondly, if that isn't the case, do you want to take this to a vote to resolve? There's clearly not a consensus. I haven't tried to add up the numbers in total, but so European Union first, I would like your reflections, and I'll go back to the proponents.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to express our views after listening to the floor. We have given our opinion on this proposal, our arguments, but we have also listened and heard the floor a very clear support and large support for the proposal. So we are not blocking consensus on this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. And I assume, Canada, you would take the same position. Yes, I see your heads nodding. So I think on that basis, we can conclude that this committee recommends by consensus, but noting the reservations raised by the European Union and Canada, that this proposal be adopted. So with that, we conclude Proposal 34. We now move on to Proposal 35 on Agalicnis lemur. This is a proposal to include the species in Appendix 2 with the zero export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes. The proponents were Colombia, Costa Rica, the European Union, and Panama, and I invite one of the proponents to introduce Proposal 35. Panama, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure for me to present as country as proponent with European Union, Costa Rica, and Colombia, Proposal number 35, which aims at listing the frog Agalicnis lemur in Appendix 2 in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2A of the Convention, and because it meets the criterion B of Annex 2A of Resolution Conference 9.24 with a zero annual export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes. This frog is mostly distributed in Costa Rica, Panama, and Colombia. It's a nocturnal frog, mostly found in humid lowland, and it reproduces on the edge of ponds. It has no interdigit membranes, and that distinguishes from other species, and it's what causes such interest in scientific research as well as traffickers. And this is easily proven by a quick internet search. Prices range between 50 and 60 American dollars and between 35 and 60 euros per individual. A study organized by the CITES authority, the management authority in Germany, reported a number of networks between 2017 and 2018, and they found a number of advertisements for Agalignis lemur on the internet, and this means that it's the second Agalignis species with the highest number of online adverts during that period of study. And without a doubt, in latest years, the number of online sales of the species have increased, easing collectors' purchases. But of course, this is probably only the top of the iceberg if we compare it to the real trade of the species if taken from the wild. Therefore, the listing of this species in Appendix 2 would improve traceability and authorities' management, of course, with the implementation of all the different commitments of the parties. It's also important to mention that according to the criteria of the red list of IUCN, this species has been set as critically endangered, and therefore the support to this proposal would ease all the difficulties set out in document AC31, Doc 37, which requires to pay special attention to Agalignis lemur. The species Philomedusa lemur is not listed in Appendix 2 of CITES, the standard reference for the Agalignis species, but it excludes Agalignis lemur in the group, which in the past it was subject to a debate on its taxonomy. As a conclusion, we would like to invite all parties to support this proposal so that future generations are able to observe this beautiful frog in its natural habitat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Panama, for that introduction. And with that, I open the floor for comments from parties. I'll begin by giving the floor to Mexico, followed by the Seychelles.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. We believe that Agalignis lemur meets all criteria for listing in Appendix 2, even also Appendix 1, as is present in the international trade, and in particular the international pet trade. The international trade levels are rather low, apparently. Most of the trade comes from captive breeding, but given this data, despite the fact that the wildly taken species are a low threat, it would be important to list the species in Appendix 2. Thank you. We support the proposal.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor to the Seychelles, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The Seychelles supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Seychelles. United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The UK wishes to thank the proponents, Colombia, Costa Rica, EU, Panama, for this proposal to include the lemur leaf frog on Appendix 2 and express our support for this proposal. Due to the presence of this species in international trade, its dramatic and rapid recent population decline, and the restriction of the species to a small number of highly fragmented populations, we consider that this species meets the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 2. We also support the inclusion of a zero annual export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes, as this will ensure the remaining wild population of this critically endangered species is safeguarded. Thank you.
Thank you. United Kingdom, I'll give the floor to Senegal, followed by Mali.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. In order to protect the species of frogs aimed by the international trade, we would like to support this proposal. Thank you very much.
So, Mali, you have the floor, followed by the European Union.
Merci bien.
Thank you very much, Chair. As very eloquently said by my colleague from Senegal, Mali is proud to support this proposal. Chair, this species meets all criteria. In Annex 2, its population is threatened and endangered. Now, for many years, critically endangered with this fragmented population. We therefore support as well the proposal made by Colombia, Costa Rica, European Union, and Panama. Proposal 35. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Marley. I have very few requests from parties, which I'm interpreting as support for the proposal. I'll give the floor to the European Union, then Côte d'Ivoire and Mauritania, and then look to conclude with Costa Rica. So, European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU, together with Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama, proposes to include Agalichnus lemur, the lemur tree frog, in Appendix 1 with a zero quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes in accordance with Annex 2A of Resolution Conf 9/24 Rev CoP19. Agalichnus lemur is a charismatic tree frog which is currently known only from a few locations in Costa Rica and Panama, and its population status is unknown in Colombia. It has suffered an estimated 80 to 95% decline over the past 21 years and was assessed as critically endangered in the IUCN Red List in 2020 with a decreasing population trend. Agalichnus lemur is affected by a combination of habitat loss and disease. While it is unknown if the species continues to be collected from the wild, it is in demand within the pet trade and is reported in international trade as of captive bred origin. As pointed out by the representative of Panama, according to a recent study assessing the exotic pet market in Germany, Agalichnus lemur was among the most frequently offered Agalichnus species. Inclusion in Appendix 2 thus appears necessary, combined with a restriction on any commercial trade in wild specimens. The genus Agalichnus was included in Appendix 2 at CoP15. However, the listing was limited to the 5 species recognized by the standard nomenclatural reference at that time. The current CITES standard reference for amphibian recognizes 15 Agalichnus species, including Agalichnus lemur. An extract of amphibian species of the world is therefore proposed as a standard reference for the genus, which would be replace the current Appendix 2 listing for Agalichnus with individual species level listings for 7 species as outlined in the proposal, which is also included a recommendation of AC 31. We therefore invite the parties to support the proposal to list Agalichnus lemur in Appendix 2 of the Convention. Thank you.
There's a lot of interference coming over the headsets at the moment. I don't know if the technicians can resolve this. Seems to have quietened down at the moment. So we'll continue with Côte d'Ivoire, Mauritania, Costa Rica, and no further requests from the floor. So hope we can leave it there and conclude. So Côte d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Côte d'Ivoire would like to join its voice to the countries that support this proposal, and we call on all parties to adopt this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. I give the floor to Mauritania, then Costa Rica.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Chair. This time I will be brief, as you like. Mauritania supports this proposal.
Thank you, Mauritania. I give the floor to Costa Rica. You've requested the floor now. If it's to support, the sense I'm getting is that there is no opposition to this proposal. So if you want to oppose, then I can take your intervention. But if you're supportive, thank you, Togo. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Costa Rica, as a proponent for the inclusion of the lemur frog, we consider that it meets the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 2, and we call on all parties to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. The sense I'm getting is all parties are supporting the proposal. I will see if there are any observers that might want to speak about this, but if you can live without speaking, that is also desirable. I'll give the German Society for Herpetology the floor. If you could be very brief, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I can be very brief, but we would like to point out that that species would even qualify for an Appendix 1 listing, but since captive breeding is very successful, we support the proposal for an inclusion of that species in Appendix 1 and a 0 annual export quota. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one more. Thank you, colleagues. So again, based on the debate, I think we can recommend from this committee by consensus that this proposal be adopted and that given the comments made by the European Union, we also recommend that the standard reference for Agalicnis species should be the extract from Frost 2021 amphibian species of the world as detailed in Annex 1 of the proposal. So with that and without any further requests for the floor, I will look to move on, and that concludes our discussion of Proposal 35. Before I move on to Proposal 36, we still have nearly an hour remaining, so I do intend to continue with the listing proposals where we left off this afternoon, so we can make as much progress this evening as possible. So So with that, I will go to Proposal 36, which is to include Lau Triton lauensis in Appendix 2 with a zero export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes. And the proponent is the European Union. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU proposes to include the species Lau Triton lauensis, the Laus wartinute, in Appendix 2 with a zero quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes in accordance with Annex 2A of Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP19. The Laus wartinute is a monotypic species with a very small distribution range restricted to northern Lau PDR outside of any protected area. Shortly after the species discovery in 2002, it has been in high demand in the pet trade due to its spectacular color pattern. Overharvesting for the international pet trade, medicinal use and consumption is considered to be the primary threat to this species. Mature specimens accumulate and form large breeding groups inside pools of small streams and therefore can be easily collected from known sites with minimal effort during the breeding season. Together with a slow maturation, this increases the species' risk of overexploitation and local extirpations. As a consequence, Lau Triton lauensis has already suffered an estimated 50% decline in the last 10 years, and the species was assessed as endangered in the IUCN Red List in 2014 with a declining population trend. Due to the intrinsic vulnerability of the species, its uniqueness, and the actual and potential negative effects of trade on its wild population, the regulation of trade seems necessary, including the restriction of any commercial trade in wild specimens. We therefore invite parties to support this proposal to list Lau Triton lauensis in Appendix 2 of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union, and I open the floor for comments by parties. I see the Lao People's Democratic Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Lao PDR fully support the proposal by the European Union to include Lau wartinute in CITES Appendix 2 with a yellow quota, code source W, for commercial purpose, because this species is endemic to Lau PDR with a small restrictive distribution range, which is continually threatened by habitat loss, harvesting, and collection. So we list this species in Lau PDR as a protected species list number 1, due to status being rare, nearly extinct, and of high values and special importance to Lau PDR. So I encourage all parties to support this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lau PDR. I give the floor to Marley.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be long. I'll take too much time. I would just like to congratulate and thank the European Union once more for having set out this proposal to protect the species. We support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Marley. And I don't see any requests from the floor from parties at all, and I'm interpreting that as a support. So that looks like, to me, the entire room is in support of this proposal. If any observers feel the need to speak, I can give them a brief opportunity. But if we can pass on that, I think, and I see no requests on the floor, thank you. So again, I conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that this proposal be adopted. So that concludes our discussion of Proposal 36. And I'm now going to move on to where we finished this afternoon. If You give me a few seconds to get the right. So I think this afternoon we had concluded with proposal 24, and next on our list is proposal 25 for Batagur Kachuga, a transfer from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. The proponent was India, and I invite you, India, to introduce your proposal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India is pleased to introduce CoP19 Proposal 25 to transfer the red crown roof turtle Batagur Kachuga from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 of the Convention of the COP for adoption. Chair, at the outset, we would like to express our concern about the global conservation status of all tortoises and freshwater turtles. Chelonians are the world's most endangered vertebrates, with half being categorized as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered by the IUCN. These animals have life characteristics such as late maturity, longevity, which make them naturally susceptible to the risk of extinction. They are also faced with a range of anthropogenic threats due to habitat degradation and loss, invasive species, and collection and consumption, as well as pet trade. There are high levels of reported illegal and illegal trade of Chelonian species. We must, as a convention, do more to protect them, as it seems our concern is shared by other parties, as 12 of the 52 proposals which have been submitted to amend the appendices seek to provide better protection to tortoises and freshwater turtles. Batagur Kachuga is a large, shy, riverine turtle which was known only to inhabit the Gangetic Basin of India and Bangladesh. It has selective habitat requirements and slow recruitment, with a generation time estimated over 25 years. It is classified as critically endangered by the IUCN. It is now known that with certainty to exist only in the National Chambal Sanctuary of India and is considered to be extinct in Bangladesh. The species is threatened by illegal exploitation for consumption and international pet trade, particularly to East and to Southeast Asia. The males of the species are particularly targeted for the pet trade due to their brilliant coloration. It is also threatened by systemic impacts on its main river habitat, such as pollution, hydrological projects, and entanglement in fishing nets. Batagur Kachuga has suffered steep declines in its population. The population is inferred to have reduced by at least 80% in the past 50 years, and this decline is an ongoing declination. Batagur Kachuga is provided the highest degree of legal protection and is listed in Schedule 1 of India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Hunting and trade of species is therefore illegal in India. However, poaching and illegal trade of this protected turtle species is a major challenge in India, where seizures of thousands of specimens are reported every year. Species-level identification of seized specimens is also a challenge. Tortoises and freshwater turtles are targeted for international pet, meat, and callipee trade, as well as for illegal domestic consumption in some areas. Batagur Kachuga qualifies for listing on CITES Appendix 1, since it is or may be affected by trade and meets the biological criteria found in Resolution Conference 9.24, Ref COP17, Annexure 1, specifically paragraph C, parenthesis 2I. Since the ongoing decline and the continued threats to the species population is expected to continue into the future, and any trade in the species will have a detrimental impact on its status. A CITES Appendix 1 listing would ensure that, number one, legal international trade in the species does not take place for commercial purposes. Number two, international trade in captive bred specimens only takes place from registered facilities. And number three, higher and more proportionate penalties are provided for illegal trade of the species. We want to draw the attention of the parties to IUCN and Traffic's analysis of COP19 proposals, both of which conclude that the species appears to meet the criteria for an Appendix 1 listing. We urge the parties to support our proposal to transfer Batagur Kachuga to Appendix 1 of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. And with that, I open the floor for comments by parties. And I see Costa Rica, followed by Mauritania.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Costa Rica would like to congratulate India on the proposal to uplist from Appendix 2 to 1 the red-crowned roof turtle. It is critically endangered, and there are trade threats as part of the international pet trade, and they're also consumed for meat and canopy trade. So we support this proposal and encourage other parties to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. I'll give the floor to Sri Lanka, followed by Senegal.
Thank you, Chair. Sri Lanka supports the proposal by India to list the red-crowned roof turtle to Appendix 1. The justification is well presented by the proponent. Inclusion in CITES Appendix 1 would ensure the survival of this unique species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. I think I said Senegal next, followed by the European Union.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you know, aquatic turtles are affected and threatened all throughout the world, and we have marine turtles, and so we support this proposal from India and call on other parties to support it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Senegal, I give the floor to the European Union, followed by Mauritania.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. Protecting large turtle species which occur in densely populated areas is extremely challenging, and the EU and its member states thank India, the only remaining range state of Batagur Kachuga, for proposing the uplisting of this species. We agree that it fulfills the listing criteria and that the inclusion in Appendix 1 will provide necessary trade restrictions. As CITES can only prevent international trade, it is important to supplement the listing with additional conservation efforts, which are already conducted by India in cooperation with the Madras Crocodile Bank Trust and the Turtle Surveillance Alliance. We hope that the head starting program, as well as the surveying and protection of nesting sites, will continue and allow the species to recover to a conservation status where it is not anymore threatened by extinction. The EU and its member states wish India and its efforts everything well and for this iconic species, and hope it will receive all required sponsorship for the full protection of the species. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. So I see Mauritania, followed by the United States.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank India for having submitted this proposal for the uplisting of this turtle species from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. We are grateful for the efforts of the government of India to work on the conservation of biodiversity, and in particular this species. The information shared on the criteria show that they have been satisfied, and so we fully support this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mauritania. I give the floor to the United States, to be followed by the Seychelles and United Kingdom, and that concludes the list of parties.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports this proposal because it meets the criteria for Appendix 1.
Thank you. United States, Seychelles, and United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The Seychelles fully supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the UK.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to India for submitting this proposal to add the red-crowned roof turtle, Batagur kachuga, to CITES Appendix 1. The UK notes that the species is classified as critically endangered by IUCN and appears to meet the biological criteria for listing on Appendix 1 following a marked population decline. It faces a high risk of extinction and is detrimentally affected by extrinsic factors, including habitat loss from pollution and hydrological projects, and overharvest for illegal consumption and the illegal international pet trade. Despite being legally protected from exploitation in India, enforcement may be insufficient to prevent ongoing illegal trade. Inclusion in Appendix 1 is expected to more effectively address illegal trade in this species. We are, however, concerned that this species and the species covered by Proposal 33 have been listed previously on Appendix 2, but this listing has not been sufficient to safeguard the species. We would therefore urge that all efforts are made to address the threats facing this species in order that in future we can be discussing a move from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. United Kingdom, I'll give the opportunity for any observers who might want to make brief interventions, but it's clear there is overwhelming support in the room. Okay, I've only got one request. The German Society for Herpetology, if you can be extremely brief, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are also providing overwhelming support for that proposal, as this species does, without any doubt, meet the criteria for an inclusion in Appendix 1. Additionally, we encourage India to support the international exchange of breeding stock specimens for controlled ex situ breeding programs and genetic research. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, the German Society for Herpetology, and with that, I conclude again that this committee recommends by consensus that Batagur kachuga be transferred from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. So that concludes discussion of that proposal number 25, and we move on to our next proposal, which is Proposal 26, Kuora galbinifrons, transfer from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, proposed by the European Union and Vietnam. And I give the floor to one of the proponents to introduce us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vietnam and the European Union proposed to transfer the Indo-Chinese pork turtle Kuora galbinifrons from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 1 of the Convention, with the following reason. 1. The genus Kuora, including Kuora galbinifrons, had been listed in CITES Appendix 2 since CoP19 in 2000. At CoP16 in 2013, the listing of Kuora galbinifrons were amended to include a zero quota for the wild specimen for commercial purposes. Based on the proposal that's sponsored by Vietnam, the two close related species include Kuora baureti and Kuora picturata were transferred to Appendix 1 at last CoP18 in order to better protect our native and threatened turtle from illegal trade. Number 2, Kuora galbinifrons is known in China, Laos, and Vietnam. Overall, the species were assessed as critically endangered in 2000. In recent assessment from 2020, scientists confirms the species is critical conservation status. The available data indicate that the species experience a population decline over 90% with 60 years, which equals 3 generations, because of over-collection for the international pet trade and consumption. Besides the targeted collection, habitat loss and degradation are important threats to the species. In Vietnam, this species is protected under the high level according to the government decree. Number 3, as also noted in IUCN Red List assessment, our extensive field surveys in Vietnam during recent years indicate that species is extremely rare. Number 4, even though the collection of species from the wild is prohibited in all 3 range states, the species is still being identified in illegal trade. A transfer to Appendix 1 will more effectively arrest illegal and unsustainable trade and will, among others, lead to higher penalties in case of offenses in Vietnam. With current conservation status, population size, and the trend of population and the negative impact from the international trade, the Kiora Ganbi leaf fronts totally meet criteria to uplift to Appendix 1 in accordance with Resolution number 9.24, CoP19, Annex 1, threatened with the extinction due to the small white population with high intensity of vulnerable and past and ongoing decline due to the exploitation. So Vietnam invites the member parties to support the proposal. We thank you very much for the EU and other member parties to support this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vietnam, and I open the floor for comments by parties. And I see first Malaysia, followed by the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. Chair, this species has been categorized as critically endangered and has shown to be highly exploited. Malaysia supports this proposal by the EU and Vietnam to upgrade to Appendix 1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I give the floor to Lao People's Democratic Republic, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. Lao PDR also fully support the proposal by Vietnam and European Union. So we also encourage all parties to support this proposal, because this species is not only endemic to Lao PDR, but also in the landscape. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lao PDR. I give the floor to India, followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. India reiterates its concern for the conservation status of tortoises and freshwater turtles. These species have life characteristics which make them vulnerable to exploitation. Many are affected by habitat loss and degradation, and they are also heavily traded both legally and illegally. Many Asian species are in a particularly precarious position. The Indo-Chinese box turtle was assessed as critically endangered in 2000, and its status only appears to have declined in the last 2 decades. Collection for trade and consumption appear to be the primary threat to the species. The Indo-Chinese box turtle clearly meets the criteria for Appendix 1, and India strongly supports this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to, thank you, India. I give the floor now to Indonesia, followed by Senegal.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia appreciates proponent countries in preparing the proposals. Indonesia, in line with the Secretariat comments, in that CoP18, 2 other related species, Koura bauroti and Koura picturata, are adopted for uplisting Appendix 1. concerning small-sized population and illegal trade or threat of Cora galbiniforms, Indonesia support conservation effort of this species for inclusion to Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to Senegal, followed by the European Union.
Thank you very much, Chair. This species was registered by IUCN as critically endangered. The decline of 90% in 3 generations of the species means we must support this proposal in order to avoid extinction of the species in the wild. This is the reason why we support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union, then Cambodia.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU, together with Vietnam, proposes to transfer the species Cora galbiniforms, the Indo-Chinese box turtle, from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. The species meets the biological criteria found in Annex 1 of Res Conf 924 Ref COP17 under criteria A5, as it has a small population in the wild with a high intrinsic vulnerability due to its slow growth and a low fecundity of a single clutch of 1 to 3 eggs produced annually. The species also meets criteria C1, as the population suffered an estimated 90% population decline over the past 60 years or 3 generations. As a direct result of overcollection for the international pet and Asian consumption trade, thus meeting the marked decline threshold of Annex 5 in Resolution 924 F COP17. As the similar and likewise threatened species Cora bureti and Cora picturata, which were transferred to Appendix 1 at COP18, Cora galbiniforms is considered as critically endangered by the IUCN Red List and is hunted with exceptional effort, which allow harvesting even the last specimens in severely depleted populations. The previously high trade in Cora galbiniforms collapsed as a result of the species' increasing rarity. Although it was once considered common, field encounters with Cora galbiniforms are now rare, and even during dedicated surveys, they can hardly be found. In addition to overcollection, habitat loss and degradation are additional threats to the species. While it is afforded full legal protection in all 3 range states, and legal commercial exports of wild specimens have not been reported since 2013, market surveys indicate continued illegal trade, as pointed out by the representative of Vietnam. Through the periodic review process, the Animal Committee concluded that Cora galbiniforms meets the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 1, and therefore we invite all parties to support the proposal and transfer the species to Appendix 1 of the Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I'll give the floor to Cambodia, followed by the United States, and that concludes the list of parties.
Thank you, Chair. Cambodia is in line with the recommendation of the CITES Secretariat recommendation to adopt this proposal to transfer the Indo-Chinese box turtle from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, and we support the proponent of the European Union and Vietnam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. United States.
Thank you, Chair. The U.S. intervenes in support of the Vietnam and EU's proposal to transfer the Indo-Chinese box turtle, Vietnamese box turtle, and flowerback turtle to Appendix 1.
Thank you, United States, and that concludes the list of parties. I don't know if any observers wish to speak. Of course, it seems again that we have come to a conclusion where the room, our parties support this proposal. German Society for Herpetology, if extremely brief, you may have the floor, but very short, please. I want to move on to another proposal.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To make it extremely brief, we strongly recommend this proposal be adopted by parties, and we support that proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so again, I conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that Cora galbinifrons is transferred from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. And that concludes our discussion. I think we have time to hopefully fit in one more proposal. So I will continue with proposal 27 tonight and invite, this proposal 27 for Rhinoclemis species to be included in Appendix 2 with the proponents Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. So I invite one of you to introduce the proposal. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Sí. Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Brazil, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica present all parties to the convention the proposal to include neotropical wood turtles of the genus Rhinoclemis in Appendix 2 in accordance with Article 2 of the convention. The Rhinoclemis includes 9 species of subspecies that are distributed in the American continent in 15 countries, from Mexico all the way to the south, but via Central America to Brazil and Ecuador. 5 species have been classified as endangered in IUCN's red list. Several species have been listed as endangered in Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. The Rhinoclemis turtles are very slow-growing turtles with low reproduction rates. Some species can take up to 12 to 14 years in reach sexual maturity. They lay very few eggs, between 1 and 6, and they are threatened due to habitat loss, deforestation, pollution of waterways for their consumption, pet trade, and their shells are being used as sold as their consumption is a serious problem, and all the species of Rhinoclemis can be found in the international trade legally or illegally. Exports from the range states have as main destination the United States, which also exports the turtles to the Asian market. Rhinoclemis poultry remains the most exported species, followed by the Punctularia, Fulmeria, and Rubia. The United States imported 76,000 individuals between 2011 and 2020. They imported turtles from Nicaragua, Guyana, El Salvador, Suriname, Mexico, Panama, and Guatemala. The United States also exported 6,348 individuals between 2016 and 2020. 97% of the exports went to Asian countries, mostly to Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. The illegal trade affects several species of Rhinoclemis. For example, the insurance number of the insured number of these species between 1999 and 2001 has been in the rise. In Colombia, we have seen an increase in 22 times of the seizures between 2005 and 2009. In Guatemala, the Areolata is between the 10 of the most seized reptile species. In Ecuador, the Nasuta is being trafficked to Peru, where it's then exported to the United States and other countries. The Rhinoclemis species are difficult to identify, and this, for the non-expert eye, like the customs authorities, makes it very difficult. And Dr. Peter Obanki from the Turtle Identification Network affirms that Rhinoclemis is one of the most difficult genera to identify, followed by after Kinosternum, Perusius, and Nisoclemis. And he says that Rhinoclemis is similar to some other hominidous species of the Asia, and it would be very difficult for a non-expert to differentiate a Rhinoclemis annulata from a Rhinoclemis nasuta in trade. So the proposal to include the 9 species of these Rhinoclemis meet the criteria of CITES because they're threatened by international trade, as well as the difficulty to identify them. As a matter of fact, 171 experts in turtles from 50 countries have sent a letter to the CITES Secretariat supporting all proposals that are being evaluated on turtles in this COP. And the Latin America, Central America, Southern America, and Caribbean countries support this proposal. We would therefore invite all parties of CITES to support this proposal for the listing in Appendix 2 of these species of Rhinoclemis. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica, and I open the floor for comments. We have 15 minutes left this evening, so please keep your remarks very focused and to the point, please. I see Brazil, as a co-proponent, has requested the floor. I'll give you the floor, followed by Guatemala, please.
Thank you, Chair. As co-proponents, we would like to congratulate Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama for having presented with Brazil this proposal 27 to include the Rhinoclemis in Appendix 2. It's our opinion that the species meets all criteria to be included in Appendix 2. As well, the international trade of this species included in this genus, amongst which some are found in Brazil, has been on the increase. So, as a precaution, this proposal is necessary in order to guarantee a better regulation of trade. We therefore invite all parties to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to Guatemala, followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Guatemala, as a range state of 2 of the species of the Rhinoclemis species, would like to support the proposal to list this species in Appendix 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guatemala. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. We welcome the efforts by several range states to protect the native fauna. Likewise, we also assume the responsibility to carefully consider, based on the best available scientific data, whether the inclusion of the genus Rhinoclemis in Appendix 2 of CITES serves the conservation of these species. There is insufficient indication that international trade is currently negatively affecting wild population of any Rhinoclemis species. Most species are assumed to have relatively extensive ranges and were partly shown to be locally common. Those species with a more confined distribution do not appear in the international trade in conservation-relevant numbers. While most species are reported to be domestically used in large scales, known international trade is mainly in captive bred specimens and largely in Rhinoclemis pulcherrima manni. Therefore, we are not convinced that criterion 2A of Article 2 of Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP17 is met for all Rhinoclamis species. As all 9 species within the genus Rhinoclamis can be distinguished from each other, criterion Annex 2B is not met. Consequently, we are inclined to not support this proposal in its current form, but we would be willing to support a reduced proposal. We encourage the proponents to restrict the proposal to Rhinoclamis areolata, diadermata, rubida, pulcherrima, and punctularia only. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union, and I'll come back to the proponents later for their reflections. If other parties, when I got 7 parties requesting the floor, 8 parties, 9 parties, 10. Please be very, very, very brief in your comments if we can try and conclude this evening. I give the floor to Senegal, then Ecuador.
Thank you very much, Chair. We would like to thank Brazil, Costa Rica, Panama and Colombia for this proposal. We think that the neotropical wood turtles meet the criteria to be listed in Appendix 2 of CITES. We would like to recall simply that Appendix 2 does not entail a full ban, but it entails as well traceability and sustainability. So listing this species in Appendix 2 will strengthen the conservation for these threatened species. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Ecuador, followed by Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. We would like to thank Costa Rica for having presented this very important proposal for the region. Ecuador, as the distribution area of 3 out of the species, would like to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecuador. Argentina, followed by Uruguay.
Thank you very much, Chair. In order to be brief and save us some time, Argentina would like to support this proposal.
I give the floor to Uruguay, followed by Colombia.
Thank you very much, Chair. Uruguay also supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Colombia, followed by Guyana.
Thank you, Chair. Colombia is one of the proponents, and we would like to thank all the other co-proponents and say that out of the 9 species, Colombia has 4 of them. We have information on trade and traffic, which shows the importance of this issue, indicating that there is trade of turtles between the borders of Peru and Colombia. Having analyzed the different threats of the species as well as the trade of the species that have been documented, this is evidence that we must improve its management and include these turtle species in an Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. I give the floor to Guyana, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. Guyana would like to record that it does not support this proposal because the evidence as presented does not indicate that it meets criteria in Annex 2A, neither does it meet it in Annex 2B. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Guyana. I give the floor to United Kingdom, then Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. The UK wishes to thank the proponents of this proposal for submitting to include the genus Rhinoclamis in Appendix 2. We support the proposal made by the European Union to reduce the scope based on limited evidence that some species in the genus meet the criteria for listing on Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Switzerland, you have the floor, followed by Peru.
Thank you, Chair. I would line ourselves with the comments made by the European Union and just UK. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Switzerland, Peru, you have the floor, followed by Togo.
Thank you, Chair. We support the proposal 27. Thank you.
I give the floor now to Togo, followed by Niger, Gabon, and Benin, and I'm closing the list now for tonight. So, Togo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. We support this proposal, and we invite all parties to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Togo. Niger, then Gabon.
Merci bien.
Thank you very much, Chair. We would like to congratulate the proponents of this proposal, and we would like to clarify that neotropical wood turtles are terrestrial turtles with a very low reproduction rate of about 6 eggs per season, and the legal and illegal international trade is a great threat for these 9 species, and it therefore meets all criteria for its listing in Appendix 2, and we support strongly this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I give the floor to Gabon, then Benin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Gabon wishes to congratulate the proponents of this proposal and recognizes that the neotropical wood turtles meet fully the criteria for listing in Appendix 2. We therefore support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Benin, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Benin would like to support this proposal, as my predecessors have said as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And there are no further requests for the floor. It's late. Colleagues, it's nearly 5 to 10. What I'm going to suggest is that we adjourn discussions of this proposal now, that we have heard from the European Union and the UK and Switzerland that they don't support the full proposal, but they might support one with a narrower focus. I'm going to suggest that the time between now and when we resume discussion of this proposal could be used for discussions between parties to see if there's some form of agreement on a way forward, noting the opposition and so on. So with that, I adjourn discussions of Proposal 27. Before I conclude for the night, I will give you an indication of my plans for tomorrow. It will be put on the schedule as soon as possible. I intend to begin tomorrow by returning to our agenda of Friday morning, last Friday. So I'll begin with item 11, 43.1, 43.2, 44.1, 44.2, 46, and 51. I will then, if there are any COM documents that we can address, I will seek to address those. I will also perhaps begin by dealing with some of the summary records, and then I will move on to continuing with amendment proposals. So that will be later in the morning or perhaps even the afternoon, depending on progress, before we come back to amendment proposals. So with that, I thank you all for your diligence and perseverance and sticking with this session until the end. I thank the interpreters also. So thank you very much. Any announcements? No, from the Secretariat. So thank you. Good night. See you tomorrow morning.